Hey guys, welcome to another 72 DPI online video. Today we're going to be reviewing the game Terror Below. This was designed by Mike Elliott and published by Renegade Games. If you can tell by the box art, it's got a little bit of inspiration from one of my favorite all-time movies, and that is Tremors. Obviously it doesn't have like the license or anything like that, but it's you can definitely tell it's been inspired just by the box art. The gameplay is a lot of fun. It's kind of like your pick up and deliver type of game with some really neat mechanics as far as the movement is concerned. So let's kind of get into everything about the game and tell you what I think and if it's worth picking up. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about was the gameplay aspect of itself and like how the game works. So the game is for one to five players. You play as these little car character things. These are your player tokens, and you basically move around the board. There's a 6x6 grid here, and you move around the board collecting these eggs. And the goal of the entire game is to be the first one to get to 20 victory points. You do that by a couple different ways: collecting eggs, delivering eggs, taking down these big bad worms. There's a couple other ways to do it as well, and we'll kind of get into those later on in the video. But the core mechanic is move your character, pick up an egg, drop off at one of the 5 locations around the board. So what I've got set up here is kind of like a standard game variant. The gameplay is not cooperative at all, although it can be, but it is the first person to 20 victory points is the winner, so there's only going to be one winner. So eventually, someone's going to have to win. Those alliances may be broken, so to speak, at some point in time, but it is a great game for the box says at least 10 plus. My 4-year-old really enjoys playing with us. Obviously, he needs a little bit of help with reading some of the cards and some of the rules and things like that, but he really enjoys playing with us. I would say probably 8, 9 would probably be the lowest, the youngest I would go with to play this by themselves. But my 10-year-old really digs it, so I feel like they did a great job kind of narrowing down that age bracket for this game itself. The game plays over several phases of a turn. You move, you gain actions, you move, the worms themselves move, and then sometimes the worms attack and sometimes they don't. So essentially your 3 worms are placed down here. They come in these nice little playing card size stats. They've got a stack of them right here, and they're on the board. They're kind of identified as these little targets, and there's 1, there's a 2, and then there's a 3, and these will match for the 2 here and the 2 there, and then the 1 here. So you can kind of keep track of where these 3 worms are. It does come with standees. The game doesn't give you any advice on using them. They're kind of there for decoration. However, we enjoy using them when the worms actually attack. So when a worm attacks, something will happen. It's got like an attack pattern on the card here. So when the actual worm itself attacks, something happens. You carry out certain phases on the board. So like for example, let's say this number 1 was going to attack here. We would take the standee for that one, and while it's in attack phase, we would set it on the board. The game doesn't call for that, but as like kind of like a house rule, and you actually use the standees and kind of give a little bit more representation instead of just this little 1 marker. This is kind of how we play, and it's just a lot of fun for the kids, and it gives a little bit more size and scalability to not really realism, but a little bit more immersion, I guess is the correct word I'm looking for, versus just this little token here. So I highly recommend kind of incorporating that. Otherwise, the tokens or the standees, they don't get used at all, and they're just there for looks, which is kind of unfortunate. So the way the game is actually, you move around the board, is you'll get a hand of these cards, and there's 6 different movement cards, and basically you'll get a hand of so many, and you'll play one, and what'll happen is on the card it tells you where to move the actual worm itself. It gives you a little bit of an ability on some of the cards. Some of the cards don't. Some of the cards don't have any movement for the worm themselves, and you just place this under whichever one you want, and you move. So like for these boots, if I wanted to put it under this boomer, I would move the boomer down 1 and over 1. So now he's underground under here, and as soon as he gets 2 cards underneath him, so the next person that plays a card underneath him would move him up to 1, 2, and then he would emerge right here, and it tells you exactly what to do as far as placing rubble, which is kind of like a roadblock slash game mechanic here. So it says to put 1 piece of rubble in each of the squares around him. So you would put one all like this. And then if you were either on the square where the worm came out or got hit by the piece of rubble, that's when you're part of the attack and you have to defend yourself with this worm. So how do you defend yourself? Well, you have these handy dandy weapon cards, and this is kind of where the game starts to kind of go off the rails, and it doesn't show any sign of being any type of realistic. I mean, you're fighting giant worms, for God's sakes. But there's like, you know, your normal weapons, like your semi-assault rifle, you've got a hunting rifle, but then there's also like the potato gun and the alien snare gun and things like that. All do different things, all provide different abilities and different types of damage and things like that to help you defeat the worm. Each of the worms have different hit points. I believe, yeah, there's 5 different worms in here. They have different attack patterns and things like that. And then once the worm emerges, he drops an egg, and it tells you what egg he drops. So this boomer will drop an orange egg. And this is kind of how the game progresses, and more eggs end up on the board. You always start with 4 eggs, relatively speaking, depending on how many people you're playing. It goes higher. But when a worm emerges, he leaves behind an egg, whether he was, you know, defeated, not defeated, or wasn't part of an attack. Like if this one emerged right here, there's nobody around to be part of that attack because there's nobody that's on that square or getting hit by the actual pieces. So the egg would still appear on that space even though nobody was a part of it. So essentially what you're doing is you're spending actions from your move cards, which they have up in the top left corner here, an actual move action. So 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7. And that's how many spaces and actions you can take. So moving is 1, picking up a rubble is 1, picking up an egg is 1, delivering an egg is 1, all that kind of thing, all equates to 1 action. So moving on here, the other part, other gameplay aspects of it is there's kind of like equipment that you can purchase. This kind of comes in the form of like hats and different minor abilities and things like that. Like this is a snowplow that lets you like move through the rubble and disregard them. So normally if you would want to move, like let's say this guy right here wanted to move up here to get this purple egg, he can't move through here until he clears out all the rubble. So to move into this space, he's got to clear out these 2 pieces for 2 actions and then move in to that space for another action. And it kind of does that to get to this purple egg, so to speak. With the snowplow, it allows him to move through spaces that as if they didn't have rubble. So these kind of alter the way you move and alter the way opponents move, and there's some in there that allow you to manipulate where the actual targets are going, things like that. Combat is a big part of these cards as well. So we talked about weapons, we talked about item cards. Let's talk about the character cards. So these are your player tokens, so to speak, and these right here, these are 16 cards that each have a different person on them. So each person has a different ability, and you're given 3 at the beginning of the game, and you choose 1 to kind of be your current character or your leader. And if that character dies, whether it's from not being able to defeat a worm or whatever the case may be, there's other aspects about killing your leader and things like that, you would basically flip him over and the next person on your stack becomes your leader. So once all 3 characters die, then you're done. You're out of the game. And like I said, one of the ways to winning the game is getting 20 victory points. The other way to win the game is by eliminating your other opponents. So sending worms after them and things like that to help keep your survival intact while diminishing their characters to 0. You've got 5 different locations. You've got the government facility, a motel, you've got a general store, police station, and hospital. Each one of these does a different thing when you deliver an egg, which is really sweet. I like that ability. So depending on what you need, that can kind of dictate where you need to drop the egg off. So like, let's say you're on your last guy, you can drop an egg off at the hospital and revive one of your guys. You get something different at each of the different locations, which is great because you can kind of map out what you need and it just adds a little bit more strategy to the game. Speaking of strategy, there really isn't a lot here. I guess it doesn't go very deep. I kind of like this to describe this game as not very deep, but definitely wide. You can play this game on a turn-by-turn basis, and you'll do just fine. You can play this game 2 to 3 turns ahead, and you'll do fantastic because there's a way, there's a clear way to victory with some of these different item cards and some of these different actual quest cards. We haven't really talked about these. These are bounty cards. There's a stack of them here. There's always 4 listed above, and this is just another way to gain victory points. And that's kind of what I mean by there's plenty of ways to victory. Obviously, there's only 2 ways to win, gaining 20 victory points or killing the other opponents, but getting actual victory points, there's plenty of ways to do that. Dropping off eggs, picking up item cards, using weapon cards. There's these bounty cards where you can kill a certain worm, and this is worth 6 points. You can deliver a specific egg to a specific location, and some of those are worth 4 points. Others are worth 3 points. There's a lot of different ways to kind of manipulate how you're gaining victory points, and that's something I can really appreciate because it's not one of those games where if there's somebody way ahead that you'll never catch up to them. There's some huge swings that can happen in this game. People that die, they drop their eggs and you can pick them up and steal them, things like that. There's cards in here that allow you to steal from your opponents and things like that. So there's plenty of ways to kind of manipulate the board and manipulate what's happening like within the current game state. So that's something I definitely appreciate. If someone is at 18 points and there's somebody at 12, you better be trying to get those last 2 points because there's a chance that they can kill a worm that's worth so many points, and then if they get one of these bounties, they're worth additional points. Some characters and some cards allow you to pick up secretive ones, so like you just draw one off the top and you're the only one that knows what that is, so like you got to be careful about that stuff. So there's a little bit of strategy there. It's not very deep, but it definitely there's a lot. It's a wide type of strategy. As far as the actual components themselves, the quality is pretty good. Like these Rebel tokens, those are a nice quality. They're not just tokens; they're some type of plastic or something. I mean, they could have very easily just made them out of cardboard and then just kind of like this and just stuck them on there. But no, they went the extra mile and made them like tactile and 3-dimensional, and it really kind of adds to it. The eggs themselves, while they're brilliantly designed as far as like the quality of them goes, I wish they would be painted a little bit different. Some of these kind of get a little confusing on which one you're looking for. Like this one, is that maroon or is that purple? Well, that is maroon. So it would have been nice to maybe go with like, instead of maroon and purple, maybe purple and green. I don't know, something a little bit different from the color wheel, but just a minor inconvenience. The board itself is nice, thick quality print. It's heavy cardstock, which is fantastic. The one complaint I do have is the top of it does not lay flat. It's going to take a little while. You'll probably, what we do is we put all of our tokens and our rubble and everything in like these little glass jars, and we just set one on top, and it holds it down just fine. You can see that this little baggie almost does. So the components are really good. The cards themselves are a nice quality cardstock. They've got kind of like a semi-gloss finish. So, overall, it's a solid belt game. The actual character tokens, those are wood, just little wood car featured cars. You've got 5 different ones. So you got like a minivan. You've kind of got like a like a Gremlin almost. And you got like a Mustang, a Jeep, and then kind of like a not SUV, a Hummer type of car. So all in all, lots of fun. You get little player cards and things like that. The instruction manual, while it does follow the same theme, and we'll talk about theme here in a minute, the instruction manual is a little confusing in the sense that it doesn't really go like, doesn't feel like it flows very well. It could use like maybe another revision. I mean, everything is in here, right? The only thing that they don't really kind of discuss is all of the item cards and some of their special case scenarios and things like that. For example, the actual snowplow in here, it just says on your turn, discard to move through spaces with rubble, gain 1 VP. Does that mean you pick up the rubble as you go, or does that mean you leave the rubble behind? So it's stuff like that that's not explained on the card, and most of that stuff isn't explained in the book, which is unfortunate. There's a few examples that they have listed here in an appendix that kind of gives you some ideas and things like that on how to play cards, but for the most part, there's going to be a lot of house rules made, I think, with this game, which is unfortunate because it is a really cool game. Thematically, this is I really like this game. Actually, before we get into the theme, to kind of tie into that, one of the big things that I would change about this game is how the movement system works. So you've got these 6 different vehicles, right? And one of the big things, in my opinion, is if the bigger the vehicle, the more the more vibration, the more sound you should make, and therefore should attract more of the worms to your location. They got it right with the 18-wheeler. So when you play the 18-wheeler down, that worm goes directly to your spot. So like let's say I'm this Jeep right here, and I play this on this number 2 blaster. Wherever the blaster is, he goes right to my location, right? So for me, like that's the best case scenario. If you're driving a semi around and there's worms underneath, you're going to create a lot of noise. But things like the sedan and the pickup truck and the motorcycle, the motorcycle itself, this doesn't move the worms at all. As far as like the distraction circles down the bottom. Now it does have the ability, like there's a saving grace, it does have the ability that says move all targets 1 space closer to you, and that's great, right? That's, like let's, again, kind of for argument's sake, I'm the Jeep, I play the motorcycle down, all the targets are going to move 1 space closer to me. And for me, where's the one at? No. And for me, that's very thematic. Like, that's cool. Like, it's attracting. I think all the cards should work like that. You've got, if you take away the semi, like the semi is kind of like that one ultra huge ass weapon. You move and you're going to attract at least one of them to you. The other cards, the other 5 cards should attract the worms at a different at a different distance, right? So like maybe the boots, rather than the boots moving some random token 3 spaces to the left, which doesn't make a lot of sense thematically, maybe it only moves the token 1 space closer to you, right? Or whatever the case may be, or moves the closest token 1 space closer to you. I feel like they kind of missed the ball a little bit with these distractions on the bottom of each card and how they're randomized, and the only 2 that actually have 3 actual distraction on them are like the least noisiest vehicles. So like the bicycle and the boots, those move the actual worms themselves the most, whereas like the pickup truck and the sedan, they have 1s and 2s and 0s even, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and it kind of breaks that theme. Whereas this game, like this could be a really strong game, and that's kind of one of my biggest complaints about it is the movement. While the movement is pretty simple to kind of comprehend and understand, I feel like it's one of those things that if it was tuned up just a little bit, if it was spent just a little bit longer in design and development, I feel like this could have been a very strong like aspect of it. Whereas now it's just like it seems kind of random, and it's still fun. Don't get me wrong, it's still fun. It just doesn't make a lot of sense that if I'm walking, I'm moving the characters more than if I'm driving like for example, like there's a pickup truck that has one little dot on it. So if I play this guy underneath number 3, he's gonna move down one space. Whereas if I use the boots, right, he's moving over 3 spaces. So the boots were technically louder than the pickup truck. Like, how does that work, and why is it moving away from me? So there's a little bit of deviation there from the theme itself. So speaking of the theme, like, it's fantastic. Like, I love the idea of having an idea of where these worms underneath, and then like having them burst out of the ground for attacking what's around them. If they're attacking multiple people, like one person goes, and if they die, then the next person can try and finish them off. It's like thematically, it's really, really exciting. You kind of see the layout here where cards are getting added, and like, okay, this one takes 2. He's attacking the next time someone plays a card on there. This one takes 3, that one takes 2, and so you kind of build up, and there's a take that element, if you will. So like if number 3, number 3 is going to attack the next time someone plays it on there. So if I have a card that pushes him over 1 space, like the boots, right, and now he's going to attack 3 up or whatever, or 2 up, and like this guy's in range for it. There's kind of a take that and aspect to it, and how many weapons each of the people have. So you're like, okay, he doesn't have any weapons. Now's the time to strike. So you can use your movement cards to your advantage, and that's really cool. But like, again, I feel like the distraction tokens or the distractions should be in here, right? So like when you buy an item or a weapon, being able to pinpoint a spot on the actual board and then move it, that's something where I would think it'd be really cool. Whereas playing a movement card, those should all pertain to your movements and direct them towards you. The more you move, the more the worms close in on you. I feel like that would add a little bit more theme and thematic to an otherwise fantastic game. So kind of moving on to like the artwork and the presentation. Artwork is phenomenal. The one complaint that I have are the artwork on the actual worm cards is just so good. It's so good that they kind of skimped out on the actual item cards. I feel like they feel kind of almost bland, I guess. Not to mention the layout of the card is this needed to be cooked a little bit longer too. When you play a card, you do the bottom first, then the top, and then the middle. I don't know who thought that was a good idea. Somehow this has to be fixed, right? So like the worm movement goes first, so that should be at the top. Then your movement's next, so that should be in the middle, and then whatever ability, if there is one, is at the bottom. Like, how is that not a thing? Why are we reading the bottom of the card, then the top of the card, then the middle of the card? That's just, presentation-wise, just doesn't make a lot of sense. But other than that, like, the board is double-sided, so there's actually a second side to this board for even more gameplay and things like that. So the story, let's be honest, there is no story. Like, it tells you that you're in the Nevada desert, which doesn't make any sense. I mean, not that it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't matter because you're fighting giant worms. Like, there's no landmarks that would indicate that it's in the Nevada desert. You're in the desert essentially, and apparently these worms are some type of government experiment gone horribly wrong. But if you're looking for like a deep story, this is clearly not the game for you. This is a sit down and have a good time type of game. So the story isn't there at all. But like I said, the theme of the game really kind of carries it through. Whereas if there was a story, I mean, if you wanted to inject some story into this game, I think it could take a page from Dead of Winter and kind of like those crossroad cards, like those scenario cards. So like, if a player clears a rubble, then you read the story card, and they either have to do A or B, and that's a kind of an inexpensive, low impact way to inject story into it. They do a pretty good job of their actual character cards. So maybe having a story deck for the character themselves. So like, for example, if you take the Dead of Winter Crossroads cards, maybe each one of these players or characters that you have has a deck of cards with them. A deck of, I don't know, 5 or 15, 10, some number of cards that you would basically give to your opponent, right? So if you were to do something, your opponent says, "Oh, stop! You picked up an egg," and then they read, and it's unique to that character. I know that's a lot of work and kind of high impact, but that would take the Crossroads aspect of of Dead of Winter and bring it to this game and give it just a little bit of a story bump. I mean, and that's the thing: is the story necessary for a game like this? No. But if you're looking for story and and stuff like that, that's something that could definitely be added to this game for sure. Replayability. So this is where the game kind of is a little rocky, and I'll kind of talk about this as I gave this score based on just the core game itself. Now inside the manual, it gives you in the back here probably 2 or 3 solo modes and then an advanced mode. There's probably about 5 additional modes in here. Plus you've got the flip side of the board that has a giant canyon in it that adds a little bit more, just adds a little bit more strategy to it because you have to jump over it certain ways, and you have to take that into account when you're looking at where to move and things like that. So there's probably about 4 or 5 different actual gameplay elements to it, including solo, 2-player mode, advanced mode, things like that. And there's special rules for all those. So I'm not counting those in this review, but the core game itself, there isn't a lot of replayability, which is unfortunate. But keep in mind, and this is kind of the caveat to that, while this game might only make it, and the thing is, we get this game to the gaming table quite a bit. I would say probably like once a month. And that week when we get this board game to the table, we probably play it 2 or 3 times. So playing a board game 2 or 3 times in a month, or 2 to 3 times in every 2 months or whatever, seems like a lot, right? And if you're looking for like replayability, after you play about 3 games of it, you've pretty much seen everything that the core game has to offer. Now, like I said, you still have multiple variants to play through with the extra in the back of the book, but the core game itself, there's probably about 2 to 3 games until you're kind of getting a little repetitive. They did a pretty good job with like the item decks and the bounties and giving you different ways to earn victory points that you can do it a couple different ways, but there's only 6 types of vehicle cards, so you're going to see multiples of those over and over and over again. There's times in your hand you'll have 3 sedan cards, and you're just like, oh my gosh, like this seems repetitive. You know what I mean? So like there is a repetitive nature to the game. That's unfortunate, but I think there's enough here to keep you busy. And like I said, when we play it with the kids, we play it once, and usually the next day or the day after, it's right back on the table again. Okay, so what kind of scores did I give this game? So gameplay, I gave a 7. I feel like there's some missteps with the actual like movement cards and kind of detaching from like how I feel it should be played. I feel like if I'm driving a pickup truck, it should make more noise than a bicycle, and it should attract the worms to me. So like the gameplay aspect of it kind of takes a couple hits for that. I wish the worms, while they do have different attack patterns, I wish that within them, because you have multiple of each, I wish they offered a little bit more variation in their attack patterns. That would be kind of neat. I wish there was more item cards. Just a little bit more. That's kind of what I'm looking for, a little bit more in that actual gameplay aspect of it. But my biggest gripe is the movement cards. I feel like there was a huge misstep there, and it doesn't necessarily negatively impact the game. It just could have been so much more. The way it is right now, out of the box, it's definitely playable, it's passable, it's fun, it's a little chaotic with the variance and the randomness of it, but at the end of the day, it's a board game, it's a lot of fun to play, and I can't knock it for that. Like, if it was completely broken, obviously I'd give it a failing grade, but a 7 out of 10, not too bad at all. Room for improvement, definitely. And giving it some type of customization with the story elements, with the character cards and things like that, that could go a long way to add more to the actual gameplay aspect of it. And that's something that you can do for like a homebrew, right? You could take each of these cards and make a story deck for it, and then hand that story deck to an opponent when you're playing. So like everybody has their 3 decks, right? So everyone has their three cards, character cards. They pull those 3 character decks, and they hand those 3 decks to the person to their left. And then when that person does something, you're like, okay, hey, you did this, and now we got to make this choice. So it just kind of adds a little bit more gameplay aspect to it. The component quality, I gave it an 8. It's fantastic. The card stock is pretty good. I like the fact that it's kind of a semi-gloss, so they're not super shiny, so you can see across the table, which is good. The rubble really gives some extra bonus points because that is just a high quality piece that they didn't have to do. The eggs themselves, while they're not painted and some of them can be construed for other ones, they're still got a little bit of heft to them. I really enjoy that. There's the card stock of the pieces, the actual landmarks. Those are higher quality. So the artwork and presentation. The artwork is great. I enjoy the different comic book styles of the worms, the actual characters on their character cards. The one downside, along with the item cards themselves, is it's just a little bland. I wish there was a little bit more to them. Not on the level of like a magic card, but just a little bit more than just a plain background would have been nice. Presentation wise, I feel like like I said in the beginning, the actual reading of these cards is such a pain in the butt, going from the bottom to the top to the middle. It makes it it makes it difficult to impress those rules onto newer players. So, hey, you play this card, you're not going to read the top, middle, bottom, you're going to read the bottom, then the top and the middle. It gets a little confusing for non-gamers. So I took off a couple points there. I gave it an 8 out of 10. Still, like I said, presentation, artwork is still really good. Just a minor gripe with the actual cards themselves. So story and theme. If I were to break story and theme up separately, story would get like a 1 because there really is no story. But I feel like the theme kind of carries the story. It takes the place of the story. So being able to run these eggs to these different locations, although I'm not sure why you would drop an egg off at the motel. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Dropping it off at the government's facility, things like that. The general store, that kind of is a little break, it breaks, just kind of breaks the actual theme up a little bit. But like, the way they've got the actual manual kind of broken up, and it's very thematic, with the blood splatter and things like that in there. The way the board is made up, and it's not just a square board or whatever the case may be. The actual rubble pieces, I feel like all the actual components inside the game make it feel like a fun experience, adventure. And then on top of that, you've got these really crazy item and weapon cards that just go a long way to kind of put it over the top, if you will. It's just a great experience playing. I gave it an 8 because of the theme. And I know some of you are going to be like, oh, well, it doesn't have a story, so why can you give it an 8? It's such a high score. This is one of those games where story really doesn't make that much of a difference, right? I could be fighting really anything at this point, but the fact that they tied the worms in with the underground tokens and the rubble that breaks up when they arise, like the theme of the actual game itself just kind of carries it through, where the story kind of takes a back seat. So replayability, I gave a 7, mainly because the core game does get fairly repetitive, and there isn't a lot of variation with like the cards that you're playing and the items and weapons that you're picking up. There isn't a lot of variation there. I would have given it a failing grade had they not included the extra scenarios or the extra like single player and 2-player modes and the advanced modes. I would have given it a failing grade because I feel like there's more to this game. You could add those story characters, you could add different movement cards. I feel like the replayability, it just really kind of goes down the tank. The extra scenarios and things like that really kind of save the day when it comes to this. The fact that the board flips over and gives you a whole nother board to play with, albeit it's still a 6x6 square, but it's a whole nother kind of adventure with that center canyon in the middle of the board. So 7 out of 10 for the replayability. So overall, I'm giving Terror Below an 8 out of 10. It's not an average of the actual scores themselves, but it is kind of reflective of where I see this game at. I think it's a really strong game. There's some things that it's missing, but there's some things that are just so much fun. There's nothing more fun than playing a semi truck and getting so many. I think it's 7 18-wheelers. Yeah, it's 7 moves, and picking up 5 pieces or 6 pieces of rubble and just kind of moving through the board. Delivering multiple eggs is a lot of fun. Picking up bounty cards is another kind of endorphin rush. And it's just, there's a lot of fun things about it. There's some of these weapons and item cards that are very thematic, and it's very kind of on par with that over-the-top Tremors type of aspect. And, it's one of those games where you can sit down for 30, 45 minutes, an hour with a group of 3 or 4 friends or family members and just have a lot of fun. And that's what this game delivers. It delivers a lot of fun. So even with the randomness that like the cards offer and things like that, this game is still a lot of fun to sit down and play. And I couldn't recommend it enough. The components are high quality. The box has plenty of room inside for all of the pieces. It gives you like these nice little baggies to put everything in, so like the components will stay, in a relatively good condition for a long period of time. You're not going to have any issues with things getting bent or broken. The one thing that I really wish they would have stepped up, and they did this with like the premium version. You got like a 3D model of the Queen herself. Even though they don't use any of it, but I would have loved to see 3D models of all of these worms. And like I said, the way that you play with these is just with them kind of out around the board, and there's nowhere in the instruction manual that tells you what to do with these because you're not supposed to do anything with them. Our house rule is when a worm attacks, you put it on the board, and I would have loved to see a sizable 3D printed or whatever injection molded plastic miniature of all these worms. It just would have been a fun experience to paint them and add them to the collection. I feel like if adding that piece, that would have brought the theme up, that would have brought the gameplay aspect up of it. Cardboard cutouts are great, and that's that gets the job done. They're inexpensive. But at the end of the day, if you could have a miniature on the board, that would have been fantastic. So yeah, for me, an 8 out of 10. If you're interested in purchasing Terror Below, I'll leave a link down in the description below. Definitely check it out. It's a phenomenal game. I did an unboxing video, so you can check that out earlier this on the YouTube channel. So you can check that out so you can see a little bit closer of the pieces themselves. But yeah, definitely if you've got a gamer in your life or you want to pick up a really neat board game that you just want to sit down and play, this is definitely one of those games. Doesn't take much to learn. There's not a lot of rules. In fact, the nice thing about the book is there's there's like 2 or 3 pages in here that are kind of clumped together that you can just leave the book open next to you. If you need reference, you can just, it's right there. Thanks for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Do me a favor, leave a like and comment down below if you like this game, if you like the review, what you like about the game, things like that. Let's have a conversation down below, and make sure you get subscribed for more reviews like this one and other board game and video game videos in the future. Thanks for watching.